Hello, it's Gabby. Welcome to the Happier Life Project podcast, brought to you by the free award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Today, we're revisiting an episode from the very first season of the podcast, back when we were known by the name of the app, My Possible Self. Now, January can be an extremely tough month for many people. In much of the world, it's cold, dark, and marked by the emotional and financial aftermath of all things Christmas. It's also a time for introspection, which can stir up a wide range of emotions. Often called the most depressing month of the year, January brings with it the post-Christmas blues. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, SAD, or seasonal affective disorder, tends to peak during the winter months, particularly January. But today's episode isn't just about depression in the start of the year. It's a broader exploration of the condition, which, according to the World Health Organization, affects approximately 280 million people worldwide. Now, this is why I've chosen to repeat this particular episode at this particular time of year. Our guest today, the brilliant James Withey, has a deep and personal understanding of how debilitating depression can be. He's the author and editor of 7 impactful books about mental health, including the bestsellers How to Tell Depression to Piss Off, How to Tell Anxiety to Sod Off, How to Get to Grips with Grief, and How to Smash Stress. James co-edited The Recovery Letters, an inspiring collection of letters written by people from all over the world living with depression, addressed to those experiencing it. James also co-edited What I Do to Get Through, How to Run, Swim, Cycle, Sew, or Sing Your Way Through Depression, which is a collection of personal stories about individuals living with all types of depression and writing about hobbies and activities that have helped them manage their illness. And I have to also add, most recently, James has released a new book, How to Sort Your Self-Esteem, which dropped early November 2024. James is not just an accomplished author, he's also a trained counsellor and mental health trainer. Drawing from his own experience with clinical depression, anxiety, and PTSD, James speaks very candidly about his own journey, including being a suicide attempt survivor. So before we dive into this conversation, a quick trigger warning. This episode does include discussions about suicidal thoughts and attempts. That said, if you or a loved one is really struggling with this subject, please do seek professional help first of all. But also, when it comes to listening to this episode, you may find James's insights and first-hand experiences both relatable and helpful. So, if you're ready to find a healthier, happier you, let's get started. I feel like I need to start by telling you I really love your narrative tone, because you're talking about such a heavy subject with a lot of humour, but compassion as well. And I just felt like I knew you after reading How to Tell Depression to Piss Off.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you. Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely the plan, is that to write them in a really kind of accessible, compassionate, but kind of humorous way, really. And there just aren't enough books like that, certainly when I first started looking into my mental health, and, there weren't any books like that. And I think usually you just find really huge books on CBT, how to defeat depression, and you're just kind of looking at it going, well, what the hell is this,
Yeah.
And it's full of jargon and terms that you don't understand. And I kind of wanted to do the exact opposite of that,
Well, you did it well.
Thank you.
Well, I think as well, gosh, if you're suffering from depression, you just want to have a bit of a laugh, don't you, as well? Whenever you can, if you can find somebody that's going through or that's been through what you're going through to a degree, but that can also, raise a smile, like you certainly did throughout the book.
I think because you're feeling so crap anyway, you can't read a huge amount. And so that's kind of why I like having sort of short chapters. But also you don't want to relentlessly read about how awful depression is, because you know how awful it is. You just, you need someone to go, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
It is really awful, but kind of make it accessible and bring some humor in, because otherwise, mental health books can be really triggering,
Definitely.
Yeah, so.
And you've got some fantastic coping strategies, which you share in every chapter, very short and sweet and to the point, through the lens of bringing a smile to your face as well. You're somewhat of an expert on the topic of depression. And I feel like when we look at the word expert, it's either academically or through lived experience, but I suspect that you probably tick both boxes now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so I was kind of on one side of the fence, and I'm now sort of more on the other. Yeah, so I trained as a counsellor, sort of way back, or in the dark ages of the mid 1990s, sort of straight out of university, and sort of spent 2 years training as a counsellor, and then worked in addiction fields and mental health and criminal justice and homelessness,
Wow.
Doing counselling and group work, working sort of directly with people for about 20 years. So yeah, I sort of have all that experience of working with people. And then about 10 years ago, then got really seriously unwell myself. So it was then sort of flipped within a matter of months, really. So I was delivering suicide prevention training, 1 month, and then 3 months later, I was on 5-minute suicide watch. So I literally went from one side to the other. And I know there shouldn't be sides, but it definitely feels like there are sides sometimes. So yeah, I went from, sort of being the carer and being the professional to having all those services delivered to me. I always used to talk about, how any of us can be, but a few steps away from, mental health problems or, feeling suicidal or homelessness or addiction, which is all absolutely true. I think once you've gone through that yourself, gone from one side to the other, you realize it even more. I think I kind of do have a bit of a unique view because I spent so long delivering care services, and then I spent, mental health has been with me all my life, but got really acutely unwell about 10 years ago. Yeah.
Right, because I was going to ask you, because in your book you refer to a time before I was ill. So I do find that really interesting. Before you were ill, you were working in mental health. Do you think, because it must have taken its toll, do you think that perhaps a part of why you became unwell was because, you were doing such heavy work?
I think certainly there is a burnout factor for me, definitely. And I think there is for a lot of people. And there certainly is if you're not supported properly. But towards the end of my career in care, I was doing training mostly, so training staff. But before that was working, pretty much at the acute end of homelessness and addiction in Glasgow. So was working with people with heroin addictions and alcohol problems, but also a lot of other issues, so abuse issues and housing issues and so on and so on. So and people who've been hugely traumatized by various things. So I kind of knew. I think a lot of people knew that I was sort of towards the end of that. I think there's a certain amount that you can give, and then unless you're really, really, really good and almost able to detach in quite a significant way, then it does take its toll. And to be honest, it should take its toll. Because it absolutely should, because you're listening and supporting people who've been through massive trauma, huge trauma in their life.
Yeah.
And that should take a toll on somebody else. You shouldn't be hardened to that. I was always of the opinion, and still am actually, is that when you become hardened to that, when you're not feeling any of that, you shouldn't be working with people because you've got too used to it, to something that is incredibly traumatic and painful, and actually that should be touching you. It's just that you also need the coping mechanisms to manage that. And I think I'd just got to the end of my journey with that.
Right.
So I think it definitely had taken a toll on my mental health. When I look back, I had mental health problems since I was very, very, very young. When my dad died when I was 5, and then I was abused as a child, and I had started to have suicidal thoughts about 14, and then I had anorexia at 19. So it's not a case of that I wasn't unwell. It's just that I think actually because of kind of shame and stigma and all those kind of things, I didn't look at myself as somebody with a mental health problem, which is just extraordinary, really. But also because there was a lack of services and acknowledgement of mental health, then you didn't want to sort of put your head above the parapet and say, oh, I'm somebody with mental health problems. So when I was acutely unwell, so about 10 years ago, and had suicide attempts, and was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and suicide sanctuaries and with crisis team, I suddenly sort of realized that I was somebody with serious mental illness. It got so serious that I could no longer do the job that I was doing. I could no longer work. And so I sort of see that point as a huge turning point in how I see myself as somebody with a mental illness. And also realised that I couldn't go back working in the care sector because I couldn't take care of myself, let alone anybody else,
Right.
So I still have a huge passion for that sector, and I kind of do that through my writing, really.
I was going to say.
I work part-time in a library now, which I love, and then the other half of my life is writing. So my connection to the kind of care world is through my books.
Do you think anybody is born with depression? Do you think it can be genetics or something neurological, or is it from past events? Is it from abuse, grief, various traumas? Do you think there's the two types?
I think it's a huge mixture. So I think certainly for me, I can look at my family and there is a huge thread of mental illness in my family. I mean, it's abundantly clear going back generations and generations. And I think some of us within the family have some of those genes. So I think then you develop a predisposition to mental illness. And then life events also then impact on that. So I think my life events with a combination of genetic factors meant that, I was somebody with a mental illness. I don't know, but I suspect if I hadn't had sort of adverse childhood experiences, that I would still have some degree of mental illness. I think I would. They may not have been as severe, but I think the combination of the two, so once you have, you have difficult life events and you have a predisposition to your genes, then that combination is going to make you much, much more likely to have some kind of mental illness. It's one of those sort of $1 million questions, really, is how things come about. And I think one of the things that I found is that I've asked that question to myself loads, and actually you never really find the answer because you don't really know.
Right.
Kind of you are where you are.
Yeah. So
I try and spend less time going, how has this come about, or why has this happened to me? And is it genes? And I can look at Auntie so and so and my grandfather that and then this happened to me, then this happened to me, and so did that cause that? And actually, you're never going to know. I try and not ask myself that too many questions because you just end up in a rabbit hole, going down and down and down. But I think it's a combination. I
felt sad when I read this in your book that you say it's common for those who are suffering with depression to believe they're not worthy of help, which I just thought was so sad.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so awful about depression is that it convinces you you're not worthy of help. And it convinces you that you're never going to get better, and that hope is never going to appear in your life. There's never going to be any hope. But sort of even more beyond that, it then convinces you that it's your fault. All those things are your fault. So it's a kind of multi-layered attack that depression does on you. And because it's in our minds, it's in our brains, it's very difficult to separate out the illness in yourself. which is actually really crucial to do, but it makes it very difficult. So I remember when I first, knew that I needed help, sitting there and going, and there was the depression bit of me saying, you're not worthy of help. You're not worthy of help. You're not worthy of help. Don't bother. No one's going to be interested. This isn't going to work. And there was the other bit of me that, because of my work experience, kind of knew that that was the illness talking. And so there was a fight going on between the two, of the bit of me going, no, James, you know you're unwell, you know you need to get help. And the depression bit of me going, don't bother, because you're not worth it anyway, and you've caused this, and you're ugly and horrible and all those other things. So there is this sort of fight going on, which is why when you access services and there isn't any support, it makes it even more difficult, because it then reinforces all those horrible, nasty, intrusive, negative messages that depression's giving you. Mm-hmm. So it is such a difficult thing to manage. I mean, it's so difficult, because without any sense of hope or sense of self-esteem, then you are much less likely to get help. And kind of that's why I talk a lot about separating out the illness from yourself, so that you can recognize a depression thought, and realize that that's not all of you. That's the illness talking.
Yeah. And I want to take that thread and run with it in a sec, but we know if you've got a mental illness, it's scary to ask for help. You might know you need it, but even taking those steps to actually get it or seek it out, because it's hard, isn't it? And you yourself say it's like you don't always get lucky getting the right help, the right psychotherapist or counselor or whatever you need straight away. It's like it's a chemistry thing. And so on top of that, with depression, you've got this other layer of not feeling deserving of getting help. Luckily, your book gives us 40 coping strategies, eh? But yeah, in terms of separating yourselves from depression, I really love the fact that you kind of created it as this, almost like depression was the secondary character. So it's like, I mean, you say it's like choose your own adventure to the reader. It's like, is it I don't know why I'm thinking of the word goblin, but, like a monster type, or, something that really repels you. And that it's creating that distance. It's separating you from, like you say, the illness.
Absolutely. I think that's really crucial. So I use the image of a cuckoo. So I see my depression as a cuckoo. So cuckoos kind of land in other people's nests and kind of unwanted. So I kind of see my depression as this cuckoo that I don't want living with me in the nest. I don't want it there. I've accepted it's going to be there, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get pushed out of the nest as well. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to listen to it. In fact, it also means that I'm going to hit it on the head, at various points and go, bugger off. You're not going to rule my life. And it does really help, because it's in our minds, it's so difficult to separate. But when we try and separate it out, then we can kind of go, yeah, this is depression, the illness, and then this is me. And they're not the same thing. We wouldn't say cancer is us or heart disease is us. Mm-hmm. So, just because it's in our mind, it doesn't mean that we should say depression is us. Mm. So we do have to separate it out. Otherwise, depression will consume us completely. So you have to sort of listen to the voice. So when thoughts are coming into your head, what I do is I kind of go, okay, so is that a voice of depression? Is that the cuckoo, or is that me? Mm. And I become able to kind of go, oh, that's a thought from depression. That's a thought from the illness. And usually what I try and do is the opposite of what it's telling me to do, because depression never, ever has your best interest at heart. It doesn't want you to go outside and go to the shops. It doesn't want you to take a walk by the sea. It doesn't want you to go to work. Because depression it will basically lie to us, and is a fraud and a scammer. So we need to think of it as, well, would we listen to, those emails that you get to go, you've won £100 million and all you need to do is send us your bank account details.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's kind of what depression does. It's kind of it lures us into this kind of way of thinking about ourselves. Like, we wouldn't listen to people from that email, because it's nonsense. And actually depression is also telling us nonsense, because it's going, you're worthless, this is all your fault, you're never going to get better, everybody hates you, you look disgusting. there is no hope. And we have to learn not to listen to that, because that does not have our best interests at heart. It's always going to want to try and take us down rather than prop us up. So kind of what I do is try and do the opposite of what it's telling me to do, which is really difficult, really tough. So I think I talk about in the book about a time when I tried to plant, a shrub in the garden, and it took me the whole day because depression was going, it's never going to grow, you can't do this, just stay in bed. And it's kind of, you're trying not to believe that. A fight going on. But the fight is really important, and I'm a great advocate of using anger with our mental illnesses against our mental illnesses as a motivational force. So that's kind of where my books have swear words in the title, because it's kind of going, I am not going to be bowed down by you, piss off, this isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
I am going to plant that tree in the garden,
Yeah.
And usually when we go and do the opposite of what depression is telling us to do, that, we start to feel better because A, we haven't listened to it, and B, we've accomplished something. So it is a fight, and it takes a lot of energy, but it's really, really worth doing, because depression just wants to take you down. That's its purpose, is to keep you in bed under the duvet.
Well, I noticed on Twitter recently you also compared it to that of a bully, and so that's another kind of disassociating yourself with the depression in terms of finding your character, then that kind of like awful school playground bully, is another one, right?
Absolutely. It really is a bully, and we shouldn't listen to bullies, and we shouldn't be bowed down by bullies, because again, they just want to take us down. It's having to fight when you don't feel like you've got a lot of energy to fight, but actually any kind of fighting back is worth huge moments. It really does I think it's that thing of when we recognize the voice of depression. I talk back to depression all the time, and I often use a different voice. So I use quite a kind of angry voice talking back to it. So when it says you're worthless, I'll tell it to bugger off. Or when it says don't bother to go there, I'll go there. Actually, I'm going to, on your way. So I will start swearing at it, and it then gives me some motivation and some energy to start fighting back. And going, no, I'm not going to be ruled by this. This is an illness. I'm not going to be ruled by this illness, and I'm going to try and take as much control back as I can.
You emphasize as well taking responsibility for your own illness, so not sort of leaning on others to do the work for you, if you will. It's about helping yourself.
I think that one's really important. So it's kind of, I think you need a cheerleading team around you to enable you to take responsibility for how you feel. I know, and that sounds like I'm sounding like a secondary school headmaster, but what I mean by that is when we make the phone call to a helpline or the psychiatric team, we are saying to ourselves, I can see that I'm unwell, and that beginning journey of acceptance is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to have people around you going, oh, can I come with you to the appointment and I'll wait outside and we'll go out for cake afterwards, or can I be by your side when you phone, to get some help? But actually us doing it really helps us to go, yeah, this is something that I need to do, and it is part of the acceptance process. And that sort of acceptance process doesn't mean that you bow down to the illness. It just means that you go, okay, I accept at the moment that I'm unwell. And sort of accepting that you're unwell and that it's your responsibility gives you some power, and it gives you some control. And it means that we're more able to do things for ourselves. And it's hard when we make those calls and we don't get the care that we need from services. That's really tough. So we just have to sort of keep going back. But that's when your cheerleaders come in really handy, because they'll go, just give it another go, or tell you what, I've heard of this, low-cost counselling service, try that. Or have you tried this charity? Have you given them a ring and sort of advice about where to get help? And that's why they're really helpful. So when I'm making those calls for myself, I kind of actually imagine people, my friends and family in cheerleading outfits, complete with pom-poms, sort of standing around me and cheering me on. So I'm still doing the work, but they're there cheering me on.
And listening as well, because even when it's super, super hard to do it and it's the last thing, again, you say like doing the opposite of what depression's telling you to do, which is like, don't talk to anyone, don't see anyone, don't pick up the phone. That actually helps a lot as well.
It absolutely does. So the amazing thing about talking about your depression and being listened to about depression is that it's incredibly freeing. And if you can find someone to talk to about those thoughts, then it's amazing how talking helps and being listened to helps. It really does. It validates how we feel. And it is that feeling of, I sort of think about it quite physically. There's all this stuff going around in our bodies, and it has to come out. It has to come out. And the best way for it to come out is through our mouths. So when we listen to, properly by someone that cares, it's incredibly powerful. So I'm a huge advocate of talking and being listened to.
Something that I thought as well was a great point. We're in a world that's, being busy is a badge of honor. But you say if you suffer from depression, probably anxiety too, the worst thing you should do is like take on too much and to be too busy. And that really hit home for me, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that depression taught me was that I was just doing too much. I was just doing too much. And when I have sort of relapse with my depression, it's usually because I've taken on too much. So rest is absolutely crucial. Rest is really, really, really important, because your soul kind of needs to heal. With depression, it feels like someone's scooped out our soul. We don't know who we are. We don't know what we want. We can't figure out what the world is about. And you have to rest. So, depression and other mental illnesses are life-threatening illnesses, and we need to sort of treat them as life-threatening illnesses, just as severe cancer or, strokes or heart attacks. We have to treat it in exactly the same way. And with those serious illnesses, we would say you have to rest and your body needs to heal. And it does with depression as well. It absolutely does. So it does mean making sacrifices. So for me, that meant that I worked part-time and I changed jobs to something much less stressful. And that helped immeasurably. It really did. And obviously, if you have 5 kids and 3 guinea pigs, that's really difficult. But trying to make some kind of compromise around changing your life will do a huge amount with the sort of recovery journey with depression. Mm-hmm. So if you're running around and taking on things that you don't need to actually take on, then depression will feed off that. So depression will feed off stress. In a big way. It loves to be fed with that stuff, and it loves to be fed with worry and anxiety, and it will definitely get worse unless we kind of go, no, this is really serious. This is a really, really serious life-threatening illness, and we need to treat it as a serious life-threatening illness. And when we do that, then we kind of go, okay, I need to rest. I need to change my life. I need to take stock. I need time to heal.
Do you think with some people, they're frightened of doing that, and it's like, because then you have to confront the demons a bit, like if you know where your mind can go, perhaps I want to make sure that I'm really, really busy, on that hamster wheel. So perhaps, which we all know is not rationally, we know it's going to catch up with you, right? There's no escape in that respect. But I would imagine some people don't like to think about resting and then letting the intrusive thoughts take hold.
I think you can rest, but you can still do occupational healing stuff within that. So you can do, crochet or go for a swim, or you could, there's ways of resting well. Because for a long time, I tried to do mindfulness meditation when I was kind of really ill. And it was just an opportunity for my mind to go, oh, let's have another suicidal thought. Let's think more about how shit I am and what a terrible person I am. So that wasn't useful for me at that point. But actually, there were other things that were really useful. So resting doesn't need to be a completely passive. You're just sitting in front and on your sofa and staring into the distance. It can be, calming, comforting activities that you're doing within that.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be watching rubbish television. It can be listening to music. It can be reading really, really trashy magazines. It can be those things as well, mm-hmm. that will keep your mind occupied, but just on a much lower level. So you're not going, I need to do this email, and then tomorrow I've got an appointment and I need to drive to Manchester, and then I need to, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're doing soothing activities, rather than activities that are just making you run farther away from what you're running from.
You just gave me the perfect opportunity to segue into what I do to get through, how to run, swim, cycle, sew, or sing your way through depression, which you co-edited and you wrote the intro for, which I'm really, really enjoying. And it's basically anxiety and depression sufferers that are sharing what they do to help relieve some of the symptoms or potentially prevent. I actually ended up Googling seawater swimming near me.
Fantastic. I love it. That's brilliant.
Because I was like, sounds scary, but also very liberating.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just wondered, when you got to put this together, what were some of the ideas that you got from this book? Because I think it's such a charming read.
Yeah. So I've done loads of stuff, actually. It was amazing reading all those accounts. So I've got much better at bird watching. Now, I'm not great at knowing what the birds are.
You can just spot them.
But I spot them. So yeah. So I take notice of what they are, and it's just really beautiful. So I was in the Aran Isles in the west coast of Ireland recently, which are just kind of stunning place. And there was all these amazing birds. I mean, I had no idea what they were, but they were absolutely beautiful. And I was just watching these birds sort of dip in and out and fly on the sea and wander around on the beach. And it was just really peaceful and meditative, and it meant that I was sort of staying in the moment. And so I've definitely done that. There's also actually cold water swimming. There's a group near me that meets on a Thursday that I contacted, and I'm going to do some cold water swimming, and that's scary. It's scary, I have to say, but I am going to do that. I do a lot of cycling anyway, mm-hmm. So I've been doing more of that, and that I find really, really, really helpful. So it was great. I was doing some things anyway, but the book really opened me up to so many other things that I could do, which I love, which was amazing, and we've had wonderful feedback from people that have taken up hobbies just from reading the book that have helped. And that's fantastic. It really is.
Yeah. And just a reminder of the simple pleasures in life as well. And sometimes we do need to be reminded that,
absolutely,
we can find joy in putting pen to paper or trying a bit of pottery or whatever it is, that it doesn't need to be gaming or something which is attacking the senses through screens and UV lights and all of that stuff.
Absolutely. I think actually trying to find moments of joy is kind of what life is really all about anyway. And certainly with any kind of mental illness and mental health struggles, having those moments of, if you can get in moments of pleasure and joy, that you're kind of winning, and those activities, all those different activities, give you those moments. And any of those moments, I kind of really encourage people to write down and remember. So I do this on my phone. So I write down all the moments that I've had, real joyous moments, and I look back on them. And it's grateful when I'm ill with depression, because it reminds me that I can experience joy. But it also generally just reminds me to go out and do stuff that I love. Mm-hmm. It's kind of proper mental health nutrition, it's really good food, that stuff. So if, you're crocheting something, or you're, or if, even if you're making a pot and it's gone completely wrong, but you're next door to somebody and you're in fits of laughter because of what your pot looks like, that's what it's about. That's what it's about, those moments, with yourself or with other people. And that does help. The book's definitely not going, and what you need to do is try water skiing and your anxiety will just go away. It's not saying that at all, but it's saying those activities and hobbies, boy, do they help. They really, really do help, and you can experiment, trying to find different ways that work. We did the book because we kept hearing about people going, do you know what, knitting saved my life, or, going to walking in the woods has just been one of the best things for my mental health. We kept hearing it, and it's absolutely true, and it's often alongside talking therapies and medication and lots of other stuff. But I think we've become much better at seeing the value of sort of social prescribing and hobbies and activities and how they play a part in our mental health recovery.
Yeah, and some of the activities are solo, but quite a few of them it's about cultivating that community as well, isn't it? And sharing the joy amongst maybe new friends, which Absolutely. We all know is like very prescriptive in terms of soothing depression, if you will. That's maybe not the right word, but giving it the elbow. I actually wanted to ask you about this, which comes with a bit of a trigger warning to our listeners. But I noticed that I did an episode on suicide and suicide prevention, and over the past. We released it a while ago now, but over the past few weeks, we've had a real spike in listeners, which I find very troubling and worrying, and which is why I feel like you, having attempted suicide yourself more times than one, let's just say.
Absolutely. Yeah, multiple times.
Yeah. You describe it as wanting to put an end to unbearable pain, and again, because you're have a great way with words, like, is it a physical pain? Is it an emotional pain? Is it a mental pain? I guess what I'm getting at is if maybe we can better understand it, then we can help each other through it, hopefully.
Yeah. So for me, and a lot of people I've talked about who have sort of ongoing suicidal thoughts and have attempted suicide a lot, is that it's an unbearable emotional pain. So the pain is so acute that you want to do anything to get rid of it. And so that's when your mind goes to suicide, because you think, well, actually, the way out of this unbearable pain is that if I'm no longer here, and if I'm no longer here, I can no longer feel the pain. So it's I think probably the psychologists and psychiatrists would call it psych ache. But for me, I just kind of call it, it's unbearable emotional pain. And it's so difficult to describe what it's like unless you felt it. But it's an utterly overwhelming sense of there is no hope. And the pain in your head, the emotional pain in your head is so overwhelming that you want to get rid of it. So, and it is really hard for those that haven't experienced that to understand it. It's kind of like, I've had friends say to me, but how can you feel like that? And I'm kind of going, well, I don't know, that's how I felt at points, and how occasionally I still feel at points. And, I'm better equipped to deal with that now, but, I still have those thoughts. And, we have to be much more open about talking about this. We really, really, really do. There's been lots of leaps and strides in mental health, but I think one of the things that we don't want to talk about, which is why it's fantastic that you've spoken about on the previous podcast and this one as well, is that we have to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And we have to be able to create conversations where we use the word suicide and, people say they felt suicidal and maybe they still do. And we talk about the reasons and we talk about what it feels like, because there'll be so many people out there going, oh, do you know what? I feel like that too. I feel like that too. I think a lot of people are really afraid of going, well, I don't know how to take care of somebody who's suicidal, but actually the worst thing to do is to not talk about it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's always better to talk about it. It won't make it worse. It won't make the person more suicidal. It's going to do the opposite. It's going to relieve them of a lot of that burden.
Yeah, you mentioned you've stayed in a suicide respite centre, which what is a suicide respite centre? Because I've never heard of it. And again, I thought, well, I have to ask you because this might be a glimmer of light or hope to somebody else listening that's not heard of it either.
Absolutely. So There are more of them in coming up in the country. So the one I went to is called Maytree, which is in London, and I think they're opening one soon in Manchester, I think. And there's a similar one in Liverpool called James's Place. And they're run by charities, and they're kind of non-medical settings, houses where people can go when they're sort of actively suicidal. And they are incredibly important places. It was one of the places that, helped me save my life, because you're able to talk about your suicidal thoughts freely and with people that know why you're there and want to have care for you and want to talk about suicide. So because it's so taboo and it's so scary for the people that love us as well as ourselves, that people aren't sure how to talk to you about it. But the people there, so there are, where I went to stay at Maytree, there were staff and there were volunteers, and you stayed for 4 nights, and you had a mixture of counselling sessions and time chatting with the volunteers, and you had your meals made for you, and it was like staying in someone's house. You had your own room and your own bathroom, and I stayed with sort of 2 other people, so there's not a huge amount of people. It's pretty much the opposite of being in psychiatric hospital, and I think this is the future for all sort of suicide prevention, suicide care, is these places. Because it was comfortable and it was nurturing and it was caring and it was compassionate, and I could talk freely about suicide. And that, taking away that burden of not being able to talk about it. It's like I didn't know how to talk to my family about it because they were too worried. I didn't know how to talk to my husband about it because he was too worried. But there, I could say, I feel suicidal because of this, and then I attempted suicide doing that, and I still feel suicidal. And I could talk about all those dark thoughts that needed to get out. And so they are the most compassionate, amazing places. And that's the kind of crisis services that we need. I'm convinced that's the kind of crisis services that we need. They're very, very special places. And I think that is the future for sort of, crisis suicidal care, are these places where they're comfortable, you're looked after. I mean, I could come and go as I please. So, I was in London and I hired bikes and I came back, and, I talked to volunteers really late into the night, and I had my meals made for me, and, I walked around the garden and I talked about what was going on for me and why I felt suicidal. And that was incredible. It really was.
And also you mentioned about suicide crisis text services as well. How does that work? Because you're texting with a stranger, I guess, which maybe people would find easier as a first step than going to a loved one or admitting themselves to like a respite centre.
Absolutely. So there's helplines like Calm and the Shout helpline that, they will have been trained to expect people to talk about suicidal thoughts, and they won't be shocked, and you'll be listened to. And I think crucially, certainly for me, when I talk about suicidal thoughts, it's not someone immediately wanting to rescue me and say, oh, but look what you've got to live for, because that technique doesn't work. So when people jump in and go, oh, but look, you've got a husband and a cat, and blah 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 blah. When your suicidal thoughts are so prominent, when that pain is so acute, it's right in front of your head, and that's all you can see. And so therefore that's what you want to talk about first. So they are great places because those helplines will want to listen to what's going on for you. You need to talk about what's going on for you before you can sort of look at what hope there is in your life. If it jumps to people going, but look what you do for a living, you have a fantastic career. We know very clearly that there are people that, famous people that have died by suicide, that on the surface of it, we think, oh, but they had a great life, had a successful career, and they have money and a huge house. It doesn't make any difference. It makes no difference at all, because that pain overrides everything. So you need to have opportunities to talk about that pain. And and helplines will give you that opportunity. It sometimes takes a bit of getting used to, because you are talking to a stranger. But the opportunity to unburden is really important when you're suicidal, so that someone is listening to you say, well, this is what's going on for me, this is how I feel, and they aren't there trying to instantly kind of tell you that you should be feeling better or trying to rescue things. I think we're slowly learning that the approach to when people are suicidal has to come from a place of compassion, to understand that pain. So when I feel like that, I want someone to acknowledge the pain that I'm in. I want someone to go, that must be really awful that you're in so much pain. I'm really sorry you're in so much pain. And then I can go, oh, okay, so you kind of get it. I don't want someone to go, right, but look what you have in your life. I don't want someone to do that. I want them to see the pain that I'm in, to acknowledge the pain that I'm in. Because when it's sort of that is seen and heard and validated, and I get an opportunity to talk about that, either, in whatever service it might be, either by text or on the phone, then I'm able to eventually find a way through, because I've had the opportunity to unload about it. And what we found, certainly when I was working in care and for myself, is that when I've spent time talking about my suicidal thoughts, afterwards, the suicidal thoughts lessen. It's lessened massively because I've had the chance to talk. So yeah, there are loads of different helplines, open at different times, and general mental health helplines that, like Samaritans, like Shout, like Calm. For me, I much prefer sort of texting or messaging. I find that much easier than talking on the phone. But from other people, it might be that talking might be a really good thing. And sometimes, you may not get a person that completely connects with you, so you might need to try someone different. They're sort of human beings as well. But yeah, keep on trying with the waiting list for help. And I once waited 2 years to get some cognitive behavioral therapy when I was really ill, and I got there and it was just a disaster, and I didn't like the therapist, and I just stormed out. It was horrendous. So we need to find other opportunities. And a lot of these charities do fantastic work at supporting people.
I was recommended the book from a therapist, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy for Dummies. I was like, wow, they've actually got CBT for dummies. I was like, they really have got it for everything.
Yeah, they do indeed. They do. They've got it all covered.
Yeah, wow, this has been incredible. Let's sort of close things on maybe a little bit of a more positive, hopeful note. And recovery is about finding meaning. You suggest finding a job you actively look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. I do indeed. Yeah, So what I found is that doing a job that I love. So for me, working in a library, I love going to work. I genuinely love going to work, and I don't get stressed about it, and that is incredibly important. So most of us will need to work for to have an income in some form, unless you're incredibly lucky. But most of us need to work. So finding a job that you're passionate about and can find meaning in, and particularly, as you're saying just then, that finding meaning in is really important. I think is absolutely crucial. Being stuck in a job that is incredibly stressful, but all you do is worry about it over the weekend, and you're worried about it in the evenings, and you're taking all the stuff home, and you're working till late at night to try and catch up, and you don't really believe in what it's doing, is incredibly traumatic. We have to spend a lot of time at work. We really do. We calculated the hours that we spent at work over a lifetime. It would be absolutely enormous. We spend more time at work than we do at home. So it's got to be something that we're passionate about, that we like doing, that doesn't feel like work, and that gives us meaning. Because that, when we have that sort of connection to something that's meaningful for us, it doesn't become a job. It becomes something that's fantastic to do, and that's a huge part of mental well-being, I think.
I agree. It's like we're conditioned to think, we'll be happy if we have a nice car and a swanky house, and we buy these shoes. But then actually, like you said, I mean, the joy of doing something that you love is far better for us than having a smooth ride with heat heat warming seats or whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are things that, give us joy for a brief moment. It's kind of like a sugar rush, those kind of things, but actually we kind of need to look sort of long term about what's going to sustain us over our kind of working life. And do you know what? It's just not worth it. It's not, because you can then afford a fantastic car and all these kind of things. That doesn't compensate for the fact that you hate your job and it's stressful and you don't get supported, or it just doesn't compensate for that at all. So sometimes, certainly, I had to make a big sacrifice in terms of money, but actually it paid dividends because, I am much, much happier in what I do. So yeah, I definitely earn less money than I used to, and you have to make changes within that. But I am much, much, much happier because I don't sit there in the evenings worried about, I haven't done this, and I didn't send that email, and oh gosh, I've got these 17 things to do on Monday, and that's what all I was thinking about over the weekend was, how am I going to get these 17 things done? And my boss wants me to do that, and it was like just a kind of endless noise of worry, and it's not work. Jobs are not worth our mental health. They just aren't. They really aren't. We all need to earn money to pay bills, absolutely. But if you can make a compromise, if you can make a change into something that's more meaningful, that might be less well paid, but is less stressful, then that is a winner. That really, really is a winner. And the heated car seats can wait, because you are more important.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, what brilliant advice to wrap up this conversation. James, I cannot recommend enough How to Tell Depression to Piss Off, 40 Ways to Get Your Life Back. And you're kind of surprised that you enjoyed reading something that's a heavy subject, you know what I mean? Or that you giggle.
Yeah. It's definitely, a lot of people say kind of, I really enjoyed it and I really laughed, but that feels wrong. And I'm like, no, that's great. It's great that you laugh. That's wonderful. You're supposed to laugh. Yeah.
Thank you again. This has been great, and I know is going to help lots of people, and that's the aim of the game with what we're doing. It's Gabby back with you. Thank you again to the fantastic James Withey, and thank you to you for listening to this very episode of the Happier Life Project podcast. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please do subscribe and leave a review if you listen to us on one of the podcast platforms. And to find and follow us on social media, we're most active on Instagram, and we're at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Please do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.